Welcome to the ABOP podcast. ABOP is the Alliance of Black Orchestral Percussionists, a nonprofit organization that focuses on mentoring future generations of Black percussionists. My name is Raynor Carroll. I am an ABOP founder. Thank you for joining our podcast. This episode features an interview with John Lofton, bass trombonist with the LA Phil and musician representative of the LA Phil Resident Fellows Program. This program's goal is to prepare underrepresented musicians with the skills and opportunities needed to successfully compete for and win positions in major professional orchestras. John, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Raynor. It was good to see you as always.
Same here. I know it's been a lot of years, so how many years with the Phil?
Well, it's somewhere in the 20 range.
For
I
goodness
started as a
sakes.
sub in '04, and then I got hired in '08. But if you credit the years that I was here as a sub, then it's pretty close to 20.
I credit those. And I am honored to have shared, I think it was about 12 years that we got to play together on stage. So it's my honor to have done that. And thank you for being here. We're honored to have you here. So, what year did the Resident Fellows Program begin?
To my recollection, it was about 2 contracts ago, which would have been about 8 years ago.
Okay. So this program, along with ABOP, which I should mention, got started, I would say, because of the lack of diversity on stage in our concert halls. And, well, the numbers speak for themselves. A recent report done by the League of American Orchestras states that as of 2023, 2.4% of American orchestra musicians are Black or African American, and 4.8% are Hispanic or Latinx. Together, that's a combined 7.2% as compared to the more than 30% of the American population who identify as Black, African American, Hispanic, or Latino. The report goes on to say those numbers have remained essentially unchanged despite more than 40 years of orchestral diversity fellowship and training programs. So, to make an effective change, I believe more orchestras are, in fact, on board in developing more comprehensive programs that hopefully will make a difference. And some of those orchestras include, not, this is not an extensive list, but just some: Atlanta, Chicago, Cincinnati, Dallas, Detroit, Minnesota, and Pittsburgh. So let's focus on the LA Phil's Resident Fellows Program, in particular, what a fellow can expect once accepted into the program. So some of the highlights are, and John, you correct me if not, the fellows perform with the LA Phil for at least 20 weeks. Fellows participate in orchestral services, chamber music, new music, and educational concerts at Walt Disney Concert Hall, the Hollywood Bowl, and community settings. Fellows tour with the LA Phil. Fellows are given compensation with benefits, which include weekly salary, fellowship stipend to cover living and housing expenses, insurance benefits, reimbursements for semi-monthly private lessons, a travel stipend for audition travel, mentorship with an LA Phil musician, and the opportunity to engage with the LA Phil's education and community programs. John, wow, this is amazing. This, to me, is a real life experiential learning, on the job training, and as good as it gets. How did that program come about?
Well, if I can just digress before I answer your question, I just want
Yes,
to
yes.
comment on what you said earlier, because when I got to the LA Phil, I was the fifth African American to be in the orchestra, and for most orchestras, that's just an unbelievable number of people. And over time, that number has steadily dwindled. And people move on in their lives and they decide to go elsewhere or do whatever else they need to do. But, at the end of next season, there will only be one African American in the orchestra. And, I'm a couple years away from retirement. If there's no other African American hires, there will be none. And so I think it's really poignant to point out that when the first African Americans were members of the orchestra, like Fred Tinsley or Bob Watt, there it was a point in time when in the orchestra business it was mostly white and mostly male. Since then, there have been women that have been admitted to orchestras, other ethnic groups have been admitted to orchestras, and those numbers have increased exponentially, while African Americans are still really lagging behind in those numbers, not the talent, not the ability, but the numbers of members who are in. And so I'm not one that believes in coincidences. I think there's a problem to be addressed. And that to me is where this resident fellows program can be very helpful. One of the problems that I see is how do you get people who don't have the access to either good instruments or good training? They have tremendous ability, but they don't have a place to really focus that ability. If they're a young musician and they are in the freelance world, they have to make a choice between playing an audition for an orchestra or taking that, $150 wedding job this coming weekend, in order to pay their rent. So this fellows program was really designed to try to level the field, to bring people into a situation where they can focus on their orchestral careers. They get, as you mentioned, lessons, they get a salary, they get, travel to and from auditions, and they get to sit beside other very highly skilled professional musicians and experience firsthand how musicians of that caliber approach their daily jobs, the practice, the preparation, and the professionalism. And so that in and of itself I think has a tremendous influence on these young musicians and the fact that they can really truly just focus on their careers, I think has been the unforeseen benefit. I mean, well, of course, we hope there was a benefit, but the way that it has kind of transpired has made it incredibly, rewarding.
Absolutely. And I see it evolving to what it is now. I can state that I was in the LA Phil's minority training program in the 70s, which amounted to, and I love the program, it amounted to private lessons and concert tickets, and I could attend rehearsals. So I think to say it's a more comprehensive program is the least I could say. I benefited greatly from the program I was in, but I think you are taking this to a much more different level now, which I congratulate you and the Philharmonic for doing this. It really makes a difference. It really makes a difference. As I said earlier, it's experiential learning. You're actually experiencing what it's like to be on the job, day by day, week to week, with the programs just flying by, the tours. It's really an excellent way to develop your musicianship and to really to see if this is really what you want to do, because it is a lot more involved. And I think that's one thing that whether it's students or others that are looking at what we do, they don't really realize the intensity and the level and the focus and the detail that we have to deal with. So again, I applaud you and what the Phil is doing with the program. So how did it come about?
Yeah, it's been a journey, to be honest. It really just started with conversations in the hallway. At the time, Deborah Border, she was a CEO and president,
Hmm.
and she'd walk by in the hall in her usual fast trot that she does when she walks by, and I'd grab her and say, hey, what do you think about this or what do you think about that? And eventually that got some traction. And so we met, we were trying to figure out like how do you frame this whole experience? Because the Philharmonic is going to be investing quite a lot into all this. And so that led to about 6 months, literally, of sitting with a group of people just figuring out like how we want the program to look. And so the biggest aspect of it was we wanted it to be the Cadillac of any of these programs. In other words, we want to be able to be really attractive to other musicians who would maybe not consider taking that kind of a role in an orchestra. And so we wanted to provide the benefits that you described, not only salary, but housing and transportation, et cetera. We really wanted to make people feel like they were special and that they were, something that really deserved, the attention of an organization like the Philharmonic. So 6 months later, we came up with the language that's now in our contract, and that contract language has benefited, I think, even musicians within our own community because it has helped our community of musicians get more salary in terms of their sub salary. So there's a lot of, I don't know how to describe it other than to say skin in the game for all parties involved.
Hmm.
So, for example, if you're a fellow, yes, you mentioned the 20 weeks guaranteed, but if you play longer than 20 weeks, then you not only get your prorated 20-week salary, you also get another check on top of that for being as a sub. That kind of incentivizes good behavior on behalf
Very
of
important.
yeah, it does. And, it means that, yes, people really, they want to complete that 20 weeks so they can actually make some real money and really enjoy, the benefits of that. However, there's always the other side of the coin. So if there's a hire and the section decides, you know what, this person really isn't working out, they have the option of not allowing that person to go beyond 20 weeks. And
I
that
see.
was something that we did in order to assuage both sides.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you almost take for granted is like, well, this is such a good program. Why would people be averse to this? Well, the reality is that they are in some instances that it's not all, a situation where everybody feels like this is a great situation. And you have to accept that as a reality.
Yeah.
There's no escaping that.
Right.
And, unfortunately, a few of those people can really scuttle things. So you really have to find ways that you can smooth over these rough edges, get people to really focus on the issue, which is that, you're really helping somebody, and that person is like a sponge and will benefit from where, your experience and just being in close proximity to what you do.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to get people to really focus on that at all times, but here's the thing that really is amazing to me is that when we go through this audition process, we get to a final decision, and there are people that will say things like, well, I don't know, we can try this player. I'm kind of lukewarm on this player. And then almost without any variation, about 6 weeks later, I say, well, how's X player doing? And they go, oh, I just love that player. This player is the best thing that ever happened. And,
Hmm.
such a good person and, really great player in the section. So it's a learning process. It's a learning curve.
Yeah.
And I'm always blown away. And then what eventually happens is, we have the original allocation for the fellows. Now other sections are asking, well, can I get a fellow? Can we get a fellow? And so I think the program has really taken a root within the orchestra side. And so we are, I think, really making some good progress there.
Great. So you started with, I believe, strings and percussion.
Correct.
So what have you added to that list, or how has that list changed?
Right now, we are adding, well, we have added a French horn player, and the impetus behind it is, sections that use a lot of subs,
Yeah.
and they use a lot of subs generally. And then probably clarinets and the winds would be the next section that would use a
Hmm.
lot of subs. But there's actual talk now of expanding the program from the original five that's in the contract to now to 10.
Wow.
So yeah, we would like to get as many people as we can and put them in that situation and help them get to, realize their career goals. I think, there's been tremendous success. You probably already are aware of this, but there have been people that have gotten jobs in, big orchestras, and they probably would have gotten those jobs anyway. But it's just nice to be able to say, yeah, you know what, this orchestra was a part of their journey. And
Yeah.
I hope that people in our orchestra realize how important that was.
I would think that those that participated as a fellow, it definitely made a difference in their getting a job. I would think so. Just the experience, again, of playing with an orchestra of the LA Phil's level, with the schedule and everything, the demands that are placed, I think then going to do another orchestra audition, it really puts you in place. So one question that I would say has come up now is, so how many players do you take and how long is their fellowship?
Well, right now we have actively 6 positions for fellows. We have 2 violins, viola, cello, bass, and we have French horn and percussion. And basically, what they are doing is, again, what we talked about earlier, but we were thinking of expanding that to more and more diverse instruments, I guess, and just having more fellows. I think there's really a benefit to them. I think this is just me, but I think culturally there's a benefit too. I just think that having people from different experiences are really helpful in any situation. Um,
Absolutely.
but that's just, I mean, of course, everybody doesn't agree with that, but that's where I'm coming from. And when I lived over in Hawaii, that was one of the things that just really struck me was, all these people from all these different places in the world sharing a little island. And, that's just the microcosm of how the world really is. And so this is something that I think has been very, very beneficial. So
Yeah. So I think a lot of the listeners and not just percussionists would be curious as to the actual audition process. So can you kind of run us through that, beginning with, I believe you have a pre-screening video first that must be sent in?
absolutely. So an applicant submits not only a videotape, but there's an essay. They talk about themselves, they talk about their goals, and that's really helpful. And not necessarily a yay or nay kind of helpful, but it's just helpful to get a picture of the person.
Right.
And they submit a tape. We form committees, and for each instrument, there's a committee for that specific instrument. So there's no crossover between percussion and cello or violin and French horn. They're in that section. They submit a video. We don't see the person, we hear the person, but the video is there so that the personnel department can verify that they're actually there playing it.
Right.
And so from that video, there's a vote. The vote advances certain numbers of people, and the people that become advanced are given a free flight and hotel to come to LA to do a live audition. And they do a first round of a live audition behind a screen. Then, should they make it past that, then the screen comes down and they play for Gustavo and the rest of that specific committee. The committee then votes to either accept or reject them, and those that are accepted have a further step to go, which is that there's an interview. And this interview consists of a management representative, a resident fellow musician representative, and usually an education department representative. And it sounds like a knee knocker, but it's really pretty relaxed. It's just a conversation whereby you get to know people. And one of the things that I don't know if this is appropriate for me to say, but one of the things that really impressed me was our very first percussion fellow is a guy who, he's from Atlanta. great guy. And in the interview, he talked about how he became a percussionist. And it was because he saw the movie Drumline. And he's
Hmm.
from Atlanta, and the movie was shot in Atlanta. And he saw this movie, and it made such an impression on him that he decided he was going to be, a drummer. And he worked so hard at it and so diligently that when they made Drumline 2, he was one of the extras in the Drumline. And to me, hearing that story was just awesome. It just showed what kind of person that this guy is and, his resourcefulness and, his ability to, really set a goal and achieve that goal. It was really eye-opening. And of course, he's just a tremendous person. I'm sure, you've had many interactions with him as well. So that kind of thing comes out in an interview. We're not going to be blown away by everybody's story, but most people really do have an interesting story if they're
Hmm.
interested in sharing it. And it makes a difference in determining, what their level of success might be within the program.
Yeah, I should say that that young man you're speaking about is a mentor in our ABOP mentorship program. So there
That's
you
great.
go.
That's great. Well,
He's
way
helping
to
out.
go for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. He's helping out, mentoring the younger, the future generations that, I mean, he's already young, but even
Yeah.
those that are following him. So let's go back to the audition again. And I know these are the type of questions I'm going to ask that I get asked about auditions, whether it's fellow type programs or not. So how many applicants do you typically review for a position? Let's say it's a cello position.
I think we've had like varying success.
Mm-hmm.
And so with cello, for example, the very first years, I don't think we had a lot of applicants. I think we only had about four, maybe six.
Okay.
And we didn't hire anybody in the first iterations of it. But then we finally did hire a fellow for the cello section. And that fellow is now completing his term. And so we have an opening now. And I believe this time we have 18 applicants for it. We have not started the screening process yet, but we will, and it's quite a lot of applicants. We have, I think, 16 percussion applicants. We have, I think, 8 or 10 violins, and as I said, 18 cellos. So yeah, it's becoming more and more accessible as people really in the industry get to witness what has happened here.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
any program that you start from, scratch like that has to get some legs. It has to have people go through the program and then report back, I guess, to the general public.
Yes.
Yeah, this is what happened. And yeah, this is something that I think could really be helpful.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty much, the how we, the numbers of how we do it. And it varies, season to season, but
Yeah. Yeah. I think word is getting out,
yeah,
that there is this program that the LA Phil does, and it's very cool. So, as I understand, it's like a 3-year term. Is that correct? Once they're
right.
accepted? Okay. And is there a review every year or the first 2 years, or how does that work?
You're absolutely right. It's a 3-year program, but it's reviewable each year. So one of the jobs that I do is almost as an ombudsman. I ferret out whether they're actual problems or fake problems. Because there are fake problems in orchestras. As you know, as a long-term orchestra member, there's a lot of drama in any orchestra.
Yeah.
And so what I do is I talk to the section, usually in February, and I say, how is this fellow doing? Give me some feedback. And I generally take the feedback to the fellow and I say, some of this is really important for you to pay attention to. Some of it was just absolute garbage. And so the purpose of that is to, if there is a problem, let's say there's a genuine problem, the fellow's not, following through on preparation, or they're not following instructions, or they're doing something that is fixable, they get a chance to fix it within the time frame between February and when our season ends in June. And at the end of that season is when I poll the section and ask them to vote on renewal. And so that at least gives the fellow an opportunity to work on issues and to address problems rather than, be the first to know that, yes, I'm sorry, there's a problem, but, thank you very much. We'll move on to another person. And so that way, and frankly, honestly, I really think that should be the way all feedback is for tenure from
Hmm.
any orchestra.
Yeah,
You should know, like, okay, what's going on here?
right.
And because usually, you don't know until it's way too late. So
Yeah,
um anyway, so that's how that works for the fellows.
excellent. So, something I have to ask for my fellow percussionists is the audition itself, the recording. How has the quality of the audio video been in the recordings that you've received? Because for percussion, and I'm not just talking only, but for percussion, it's a different beast. There are a lot of logistics with recording, let's say, snare drum versus a soft timpani roll versus a tambourine part. And there's always, is the recording quality up to par? Is it good enough? What has your experience been in listening to some of these recordings?
I think you're right. The quality of the recordings vary from person to person and equipment to equipment. But I always preface, I right now I've done this so many times, I have a kind of memorized spiel that I give before we listen to any of these auditions.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
one of the things that I mention is that you're going to hear a lot of different variety and quality of recording. And if you could focus on the playing more so than the actual recording itself, then I think that would be really helpful. And most people are really good with that. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, of course, if somebody uses an iPhone and they just basically have no ability to make any kind of discernibly, listenable recording, yeah, that becomes problematic. But for the most part, people make an effort, and it's not necessarily, made for, TV quality, but
Hmm.
it's good enough that you can tell if they can do stuff.
Right.
And the other thing is that there's an escape hatch, if you will. If you invite them to a live audition, they still have to play their way in front of the screen.
Of
So
course.
there's no reason to not be generous about it. In fact, I can tell you that one of our fellows, that exact experience happened where the recording was a very poor quality. And there was like, well, let's see, let's, have this person come and play, a live audition. And that person ended up winning the position.
Yeah. So then speaking of the screen, so in your auditions, like the actual auditions in the film, your screen comes down. So why is that? Because there's a lot of talk and controversy about screen. So why does it come down, let's say, I guess you said in the final round?
Correct. That is such a hotbed topic, because other organizations are really championing the idea that having a screen up will eliminate any kind of unconscious bias. I think there are ways that you could look at that and say, is there a one solution for every situation? So for example, in the Philharmonic, is that really the problem that there's a screen, or is the problem that there really aren't enough candidates that
Hmm.
are in the pipeline? Because in my humble opinion, I think that in any given audition, let's say not just a resident fellow audition, but on a regular audition, you may have, one or two African Americans at the most take that audition. And so out of 100 people, you have, 1 or 2% chance of winning. But what if you had 10 or 15 African Americans in that line of auditionees? What will your chances of getting those people to the next level and to a final round be? In my mind, I think that's what I would like to bring focus to in terms of what the fellows program can do,
Hmm.
is to bring an awareness that, yes, we have all these organizations that do audition prep for African Americans like SOPA and, National Alliance for Audition Support, and, all these organizations where we can tap those resources of people that are generally already vetted as qualified players and bring those players into the pipeline so that those players can compete on an equal basis. I know that I have been really trying to figure out if the screen is helpful or not helpful, because I can imagine circumstances in which a player who we really like would probably benefit from having the screen down because people go, oh, it's that specific player that we really, really like. And maybe that player might have gotten the job had we not, had the screen up and it was all presumably unbiased. So I think that it's a sword that can cut both ways. And I think, if I'm just really trying to focus on the problem, in my opinion, the problem has a lot more to do with the numbers of players in the pipeline than whether or not, they get to a screened round or an unscreened round.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think the problem is the numbers. Well, I say that's a part of the problem is
Right.
the numbers, but I think there is this issue of you have a screen up. Why are you taking it down now? Why did you have a screen in the first place if now you're going to take it out? So anyway, that's another podcast we can do. And that would probably be 3 episodes itself on screen versus not screen. But along the same lines with the auditions, some of the other orchestras that are doing this fellow type training program have instruments competing against other instruments, as in, let's say they have an opening for 1 or 2 fellows. So, whatever instruments they have for this audition, let's say a bassoon, a clarinet, a percussionist, and a trumpet player, they're all competing. The 4 of them are competing for 2 spots. Now, is my understanding the LA Phil does not do that. They are separate. They are separate categories. It's like a real audition. You wouldn't have a bassoon playing against a trumpet player to gain entry into an orchestra. So I want to make sure that's correct, that the Phil does not do it that way.
That's right. I mean, it would be unfair. It would be, if you have a, and I don't hate me tubas, but if you had a tuba, competing, playing a concerto against a cellist, yeah, people are probably going to gravitate to the cellist, just because of the nature of the instrument. And also, I think that the sections themselves have to want a fellow. Because that's really important to really create a successful experience for all of us. Not just because, the orchestra thinks that this is the right thing to do, but because this section understands the impact and also the benefit of having a fellow. And so having one where, okay, we may get one, we may not get one. No, I want our sections to want one and to really say, yes, I need to have that person in my section because, that's going to go a long way towards their success.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the best case scenario. The section is unanimous in wanting this and wanting it for the reason of benefiting the fellow.
Yeah.
So along with that, how do you match up a fellow with a mentor in the orchestra? And I'm going to assume that, or you tell me, is the mentor from the section or is it someone from the orchestra?
It could be from the section, it could be from the orchestra. It, so this is something that you've raised a really good point, Raynor, because if a fellow joins a section and they decide that, well, gee, maybe there's somebody in a section I can really confide in. I mean, they're new to the orchestra, and we all have politics in every section. And you never know which side of the political winds that you're going to be on in your section. So when I tell fellows about getting a mentor, I tell them that, yes, keep in mind that you may be better served by looking outside of your section because then you're not considered to be friends with this group of people that aren't friends with that group of people within your own section. And almost to a person, that's been the case. Well, they've gotten mentors, it's been from someone outside of the section. One of the things that kind of bugs me, and I don't know whether this is maybe just me being petty, but nobody's ever asked me to be a mentor. So I'm thinking like, well, wait a minute, I'm
John,
here.
man, don't take it personal, man. Don't take
Okay,
it personal.
okay, I won't take it personally. I'm just thinking like, okay, well maybe, but I think what it is they look at me as some kind of like, vice principal figure,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely. You
so
are.
And so I figured, okay, well, whatever. This is the role I've got. This is it. But yeah, but they
So,
do use mentors, and it's very helpful.
to me, that's one of the most valuable parts of the program is having someone that you can talk to about what's going on, whether it's in the orchestra, whether it's outside, where you're now moved in from Cleveland. Let's say you're a student at Cleveland and now you've got this position. You've got to find a place to stay. You've got to find, a means of living to sustaining yourself. You've got insurance. You need to have someone to talk to besides the personnel manager, besides the principal of the section that you can just talk to in an easy way, and they're not sitting beside you in the orchestra, perhaps, that can guide you and absolutely mentor you in a lot of these areas that are just kind of, it's not written in the details, but it
Yeah,
just comes up in life.
that's
So I think
exactly
that's a
it.
very valuable thing. And I have a question, and I know the answer, but has any of the fellows asked Gustavo to be their mentor?
Well, I think you know the answer to that is no.
Okay, okay. I mean,
But
that would take some nerve to do that, but that would be a good thing also.
it
I
would.
mean, it's like going to the principal, it's going to the president, it's going, but why not? They've bought in on this program, so.
I always tell people, play for all the people that you think might make you nervous.
Yeah,
Because, if you can play for
yeah,
them, you can play for anybody. And
yeah,
it's really good practice. Even if you don't like the feedback, it's good practice to really get yourself out there so that when you do do it for all the money, that it's become so old hat that you have so much really great experience at it that you can just, do it without, getting yourself all, wound up about it.
yeah. And being able to accept constructive criticism is a very good quality that you want to learn. You want to learn, and that's what this program is about. It's about learning and developing not only yourself musically, but as a person in all aspects, I'm sure. And there's a lot that goes into that, but that's what the bottom line is that your time in this program, they see, as in the Philharmonic, sees that you've progressed. You've really moved on from where you were from when you began. So that leads me to another question. What would you say, and if you could say, what is the quality that all of your fellows have had when they've been accepted to the program? So not when they're done, because we're going to talk about that and want to hear about success stories, but again, I'm looking at some potential students that would love to be in your program. What would you tell them, perhaps a quality that you've noticed in a lot of the fellows, if not all, that have been accepted into the program?
It's a really good question. I think one of the things that comes to mind is whether or not they have really basic skills And when I say that, I can honestly say that of all the fellows that we've accepted, I would say almost none of them would have won an audition with the quality of playing that they displayed at the fellows audition, but they all had some basic skills level that they were able to, function with. So, and we all know what that means. They could make a decent sound, they could play with, decent rhythm, they had, decent pitch. Those things tell the committee that, yes, you know what, I'm not going to have to fix any problems here with your playing, but yes, you may have to figure out how to ramp up your learning experience so you can really get this to the next level much quicker. But if you really just have good fundamental aspect to your playing, you can really be very successful. And it's funny, I tell that to my students too. They think, well, gosh, what do I have to do to get past this first round? Well, if you just play with a good sound, a good pitch, and good rhythm, your chances of getting past that first round are really good
Yeah,
because that's really what people are listening for.
yeah.
And then, it gets more complicated later on. But I think in the fellow situation, I mean, we're not like looking at somebody who's perfect or just completely, you know, polished, but we are looking for players that have a certain skill level that, yes, they're in control of their instrument. And the reason being that, as you alluded to earlier, the music just comes flying by in the season. There are some things that come flying by that, people in the orchestra, they need to have like, a couple of weeks to really ramp up to that. And you can imagine somebody who's struggling to have control over their instrument, what kind of a challenge that would be.
Yeah,
So if they have some basic skill level, then I think their chances of going far in this audition are really good.
yeah. So that makes me think about mock auditions. So do you have that a part of your program? So once they're in on a regular basis, whether it's every 6 months or whatever, or even before, let's say you have a fellow and they're in their second year and they're going to audition for X orchestra. Is it a part of the program to have a mock audition before they do that audition?
Not necessarily for that specific purpose, but
Mm-hmm.
interesting that you bring that up because one of our fellows actually, we actually polled the fellows and asked for feedback. How can we make this program better? What can we
Right.
do for you that make you more comfortable? And one of the things that we received in this feedback was to have mock auditions. So we added that to the fellows program where now we have mock auditions twice yearly. And they go through it and they get a chance to, if it's a string player, to learn like a different concerto than the one that they auditioned with, because
Mm-hmm.
some lists want X concerto, some want Y concerto. And they get to go through this process of facing the almighty screen and having people behind them give them feedback. And so that was one of the really great items of feedback that we got from one of our actual fellows. And I think, that's been very helpful.
Yeah, I would think so. As we know, one of the difficulties in being a member of an orchestra is passing the audition. And how do we make that experience easier as we get going? We do more auditions. So
Yeah.
I'm a strong believer in that you need to play in front of people, whether it's an official mock audition or whatever, so that when you're in that position, it's not new, it's not different. You're used to it. You've played the repertoire how many times in front of someone, not just in your practice room by yourself. Because it doesn't really matter there. You can be the best violinist by yourself, but what counts is when you're on stage.
That's
So,
exactly right. And I think, it also helps with people that have a lot of nerve issues,
yes.
when they're performing. The more you do it, the less of a mountain it is to climb. And I think, people can really be proactive in that regard. And again, I played trombone. Well, I would play for a cellist or oboes or violinists,
Yeah.
not because I thought they knew anything about trombone, but because I knew that these are people that are going to be listening to my audition at some point or another.
Right.
And what is it that these people respond to?
Yeah.
And also, hopefully, there'll be people that would make me nervous, like the concertmaster or the principal cellist or principal oboe player. And, most people are pretty happy to have you share their opinion about
Yeah.
anything. And so I think that, it's not like you're really putting people out. I mean, people love to do that. So,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
more you do it, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, these are your colleagues or your potential colleagues, and you need to win them over. You need to, it's not just your section, the players that play your instrument, but as we said on a panel, there will be a panel made up of the orchestra, which is not just your section. So
Yeah.
it's great, as you said, to get the feedback from an oboist when you're a trumpet player or a violinist when you're a tubist, because they have a different perspective. They don't typically know the technical things associated with your instrument, and that's fine, but they do understand music. That's my
Yeah.
understanding is that they hear music. And another thing I like to say is that when I hear someone play solo repertoire, I want to hear the orchestra. By
Mhm.
you playing the way you play, the way you phrase, the way you articulate, it sounds like I'm in the orchestra. You've won me over.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if it just sounds like you're playing what's written on the page, I have a problem with that.
Yeah.
So I think it's good to have a different perspective in that way, you know.
I couldn't agree more. And, that's one of the things that happens. Now, the mock panels for the fellows are made up of a diverse group of musicians because, of course, you might have a cello fellow or viola fellow, and so you have someone from those sections, and the percussion fellow will be there, etc. So, yeah, that is much more representative of what that fellow may experience in an actual audition. And again, there's no substitute for real world experience. And, this is what you're going to see out there when
Yeah.
you get out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So one other thing to ask, perhaps in closing, is, we talk about the musical, we talk about the personal and the mentorship. Along those lines, also, is there any guidance for, and this is a harder subject, the mental side, the stress of what we do as a professional musician in an orchestra?
That's a really good question because it's real. It's not just imagine that, yeah, this could be the case. No, it's very stressful. Our fellows do have access to mental health.
Great.
They have the same programs, same health insurance that we have. But even at that, I tell the fellows that you have a built-in problem. One is that you have all the responsibility, but you have none of the privileges. And so, you're thrust into a situation when you're expected to be a colleague for some of the time, and then you're expected to be a mentoree other parts of the time.
Hmm.
That's a very narrow ridge to span. And, when I was alluding earlier to, what my job is, along that line, I try to keep people focused on the issue, which is this person problematic or is the problem something that's just, systemic within this whole process? Because I'm going to admit that no process is perfect. In fact, if things were working perfectly, we wouldn't even need this. But, we need this because we are trying to catch up to where I think we could go eventually. But, just if you'll allow me to digress just
Hmm.
slightly, one of the things that I found that's more challenging than I imagined is that African Americans, especially if they're young and very talented, tend to decide, you know what, I don't think I want to go and do this as a living. They become much more entrepreneurial
Hmm.
and they do things outside of the orchestra world because, they don't want to feel like they're a token or that they're being exploited. And there's a part of me that feels like I really understand where that's coming from. There's another part of me that says, that's kind of the whole purpose of of racism, right? Is to get you to defeat yourself
Yeah.
and, or to exclude yourself. And I'm kind of sort of, of two minds in that. I can't say no, that's not the right way to go, but I also can say that I really hope that people who are out there that are young people can understand, the impact that they have when they're on those stages and another person of color sees them on the stage. I cannot tell you how many times I've walked through the lobby and somebody will say to me, "Oh, what happened to X player that was there last week? I didn't see that player." Or how much it means to see a player that looks like them on stage. And we're not talking about kids who are maybe 15, 20 years away from being an orchestra patron or donor. I mean, we're talking real world, like right now. And so I tell people you have no idea what positive impact that you have just because of who you are. And I think people need to hear that. And I just wanted to make sure that I understand where they're coming from. But I really hope that they consider that this isn't necessarily only about the negative, that there's a huge positive out there as well.
I have come across that. It's unfortunate, but like you say, it is their own decision. I think in part it's how do we get more on stage if we have that issue, you know? That's a problem. And then on the other side, I'm thinking, well, if they're saying this, perhaps this is really not their passion. Their passion is elsewhere. And then I'm fine with that, you know? Go for it. But on the other hand, like I said, we have this deficiency in numbers. How do we address that? How do we pursue having them push on? And perhaps, again, maybe once they're working towards this goal, they realize not that it's not their passion, but they don't have it. They don't have it. And that's a possibility too, because as you know, as we know, it really, really does take a lot to get to that point. It takes such focus. And maybe that's just not the way they're set up. They can see that, but they're like, this is my limit. So, diversity. We're talking about diversity in all areas is needed. So, it's not just the musicians, but obviously who we look up to, the conductors. And the conductors then become music directors. We need that also. We need diversity in our staff, in our top executives, in the board members, because it all works together. We all work together. If we're just talking about diversity on musicians on stage, that's not enough. That's not going to solve the issue. We need it in our community. We need it with what we do on stage so that, again, I think there's such power in diversity in every which way.
Absolutely. I think that what you just said there about having an organizational focus on having a representative group of people. And when I say representative, I mean most orchestras are in urban areas. Most urban areas have, robust populations from very diverse backgrounds. But the orchestras themselves generally are not. They're generally very focused in specific areas, and that includes, as you say, board staff, as well as the musicians on the stage. And so I think that it takes some effort and some focus to bring about, the kind of talent and be attractive to that kind of talent that we don't really generally understand as valuable talent. And so I don't know what the answer is in terms of the staff and board because it seems like those things are much more easily doable. It's hard to win an audition, but you can be an at-will employee. So it seems to me that that's a little bit easier on the staff side. The board side may be a little bit more tricky. I don't know. But I do agree with you that, having this kind of diverse experience is going to benefit everybody. And so I'm just hopeful that programs like this, demonstrating the success of the programs, can really make generations down the road think about how important this is. I mean, look at what you just described. You were part of the diversity program, and you ended up having a long career in a professional orchestra and a top professional orchestra for that matter. So you never know where this is going to go. But my thing is, the only thing that's really going to stop you is if you don't try.
Yeah.
So I tell people,
Yeah.
if you really want to, if you really want to try and make a change, you got to get out there and shake things up. You never know where it's going to go. So that's my motto.
Absolutely. John, thank you so much. Thank you for establishing and overseeing this program with the Phil and making sure that the fellows are given the proper guidance and the mentorship that they deserve. And I greatly appreciate your continued support of ABOP.
Well, it's my pleasure. You guys are doing such important things, and we're all in this together. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all that you do as well.
Thank you, John. That concludes this episode, LA Phil Resident Fellows Program. Thank you to our guest, John Lofton, bass trombonist and musician representative of the program. I hope you enjoyed our discussion. Please send your comments and your suggestions for topics you would like discussed. A special thank you to our supporters and sponsors of ABOP's mentorship program. Our corporate sponsors include Black Swamp Percussion, Cooperman, Freer Percussion, Innovative Percussion, InSound Mallets, Majestic Percussion, Marimba One, Malatech, Remo, Sabian, Vic Firth, and Zildjian. ABOP is a nonprofit. Your donations are tax deductible. Check out our website, www.abop.us, for information on how you can contribute. Please follow our podcast and spread the word about ABOP. We greatly appreciate your support. We are the Alliance of Black Orchestral Percussionists, ABOP. Thank you for listening.